looking back, a lot of that probably came from me trying to model a little bit after my dad, because my dad was very much that way in the household where it was, hey, if you want something, you better come to me with a thought through idea and be able to present your ideas in a concise manner that makes sense, that has a very clear outcome.
Welcome to Increase the Dosage. This is the show that strips away the facade of fake entrepreneurship. It removes the glamour, comes from the trenches, and provides the naked conversations, war stories, lessons learned, and the tools and tricks used by the successful entrepreneurs who overcame their challenges to achieve new growth so that you can too. Now, for your weekly shot of entrepreneurial adrenaline, here is your host, serial entrepreneur and venture catalyst, Chris J Snook.
Welcome back, everybody. Chris J Snook here with another episode of Increase the Dosage, episode 2. And I'm super excited today because this young woman is someone I met years ago in Colorado when we were hosting a startup week there. And she came out and spoke, and she's got a tremendous entrepreneurial story that probably began before she was 18. But the thing she's been famous for is the fact that she and her brother had started a company at 18 and sold it by age 20, and had some significant major investors in that, including Khosla and Branson and several others. And so certainly no lack of interesting dynamics we're going to talk about today as we go through the highs, the lows, and everything in between with Stacey Ferreira. Welcome to Increase the Dosage.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. So you're currently co-founder and CEO of Forge. We're going to get into that, throughout the show. Joinforge.com is the site for those keeping score. But let's talk about how you got started. So, this word entrepreneur today is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's on, 18 million profiles as one of the things that describe most people on social media. But there was a point, probably even before your time, because you're younger than I am, thank God, that it wasn't a career choice. It wasn't really even a big word, 20, 30 years ago, kind of meant you were unemployed. But, it's become a thing. And yet, you've been on some really interesting sides of it through a different ramp than a lot of people in your age bracket, meaning you've been through institutional financing, you've been through exits and acquisitions, You've done a lot of things, and you've primarily done that in technology, or what most people consider that Silicon Valley kind of universe. So when did you first realize you were an entrepreneur, or that you wanted to be one? And what was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that because, I remember when I started my first company with my brother. I'll never forget, I was probably about a year into that business, and I was doing my first ever interview with a reporter for, I think it might have been the LA Business Journal. And the reporter asked me, what are your thoughts on being a young entrepreneur? And I remember having to look up, luckily all these questions were through email, but I remember having to look up the word entrepreneur. I literally did not even know what that meant, because I grew up in a household where, for context, both my parents met in the accounting department at IBM. So I grew up in a household where you go to college, you graduate, you get a job, and you work your way up the corporate ladder. This whole concept of starting a business and being an entrepreneur was something that was foreign in my household. I just knew from a young age that I liked building things. And I didn't know that there was a word that went along with that. And I didn't know that that was necessarily an acceptable career path. But I remember, my brother and I always had these ideas specifically for technology companies, because we were learning how to code in middle school and high school. And we decided, hey, let's just go for the summer and start building this idea that we have, which at the time was to build a site for people to store all their usernames and passwords and log in with just one username and password. And that's really what started that entrepreneurial journey, although I didn't even know that entrepreneurship was what that was at the time that we started.
So prior to that, what's really interesting is that both you, how many siblings do you have? Is it just you and your brother?
It's just the two of us.
So it's interesting. I'd love to hear, what your parents' version of this would be, but it's interesting that two, people that kind of, I would put in that conservative, DNA strand, because accountants typically are very methodical and very, that's kind of why they're good at it. And then working for Big Blue, obviously, is, doesn't get any I'm not saying it's certain, but in other words, there was a time in life, certainly when they were coming up, where that was the company to work for, and you had some real security there. We could argue that differently since, but the bottom line is that it's interesting that they had two entrepreneurial kids. Was there a point in time growing up, whether it was 5, 6, 10, 11, 12, or you and your brother, when you say build things, where you were doing stuff in the community, like not just lemonade stands, but like, did you ever, or was it really like, we like this, we see a problem, let's go see if we can do something with it, and next thing you know, you're funded by Richard Branson and you're down on Necker Island? Like, how does someone get to that as their first rodeo, or was it not your first rodeo together?
Yeah, we were always, from a young age, a lot of the stuff that we were doing was confined within the home. And so I'll give an example. Like when my brother and I remember I must have been 6 years old, maybe seven, and my brother was 8 or 9. And my brother and I would come home from school and we would pretend that we owned a restaurant in our house, and we would make these menus and build a business plan and have like a binder with our business plan and all the menus, and then we'd pretend that this one room in my house was the restaurant, and we'd open up the restaurant. And that's kind of how we quote unquote played as children, was these little ideas that we had like that. And then as we started getting older, we started translating that into coming up with business plans for legitimate ideas. I remember I built a business plan. I must have been 12. I built a business plan. I wanted to open my own record studio.
Did you call it a business plan at 12, or did you call it something else?
I don't know that I directly called it a business plan.
But you kind of thought about it that way in your mind. Like I know, like, it's
Yeah,
hard to unpack, but at 12, you knew you were building it to kind of understand how to make money out of it, or how to make something like a
exactly.
business out of it.
And I remember going to my mom and asking her, like, "Hey, I need some pieces of paper. I need a binder." And I like put together these presentation packages that then I would go and pitch to my parents around, this is something that I want to start. And I think for the longest time, my parents probably were like, all right, that's a cute project. Obviously, you're not going to go start a record company or whatever it is. But then eventually, those plans got a little bit more realistic, I would say, around the time that I got into middle school and high school, because I started pitching my parents for little things that I could get to teach myself things. So I remember pitching my parents to buy me my first laptop. And I put together this whole presentation on the ROI of getting a laptop for myself to be able to learn how to code.
And so I'm so curious, like, so I love how you're saying, like, I pitched my parent. Like, every kid tries to sell their parents, to get them stuff, right? But usually that, is them just saying, I want that. And then when they're told no, going, no, 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 no. And then they're like, yes, yes, yes. And then, usually it's a tantrum. You're like, no, I'm not even going to put them through that. I'm going to come up with a full on, I'm trying to understand whether this was innate in you, or whether your parents, even though they weren't pushing entrepreneurship down your throat, obviously, because they weren't, like, was it something that you saw them doing just in the way they went about their life and how they organized the family or vacations, that this was like a Ferreira thing, that we just package stuff up and then explain what we're going to do and then decide? Like, where did this idea that you had to create this narrative and logic and reasoning to justify decisions, where did that come from?
Looking back, a lot of that probably came from me trying to model a little bit after my dad, because my dad was very much that way in the household, where it was, hey, if you want something, you better come to me with a thought through idea and be able to present your ideas in a concise manner that makes sense, that has a very clear outcome. And I think a lot of that was, seeing him in his career and then trying to model that myself. And then that's just kind of the way that, we have done things in our household. And even to this day, it's kind of interesting. I love my dad, but he's busy with work too. And so the relationship that we have a lot of times is, hey, if you want time on my calendar, schedule a time with me and get time on my calendar. So a lot of it has been, kind of looking up to that, to some sense, saying there's no free lunch. You don't get handouts. You've got to come with a concise story, narrative, and understand what's in it for both parties, and then make that pitch and that argument of why you should or should not get something.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I don't know your dad, but we've had several conversations over the years, and I've kind of watched even just on social media, like I've seen you post stuff, and my notion is that you guys have a very cool family dynamic, and that it's one that is prioritized. And I think it's interesting that you can have that, and yet you can still have this kind of I don't want to say authoritarian, but you can kind of have like this show me why I should give you an hour on my calendar. Like you're my daughter, show me why. Right. But I don't think you organize. It doesn't seem like anyway that you organize your relationship that way. It is a priority, but it's just one of the things that facilitates the ability to have those times together because that's a reality of our constraints. Is that accurate? Or have you guys learned to find, the relationship that you value with that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people might say, wow, that's kind of weird. But to me, like you said, there's a lot of pulls on people's time today. Having a relationship where you can just be upfront and be like, hey, let's schedule a time together.
It cuts through a lot of stuff, right? It's like,
It does. And it also kind of gets to the point of, hey, I love you. You're a part of my family. It's fantastic. But at the same time, we're both busy trying to make strides in the world, and let's do what we've got to do to help each other get there. And I think there's kind of a level of mutual respect too. And that's one of the things that I think to me it's not weird because I kind of feel like in some sense my parents they treat me like an adult. They say, hey, like every other adult in our life, put a time on the calendar if there's something important to you that you need to chat with us about, which I kind of
yeah.
respect that I'm not just this kid in their eyes.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the entrepreneurs listening to this that are parents, I think this is something that we think a lot about. Having a 7-year old is I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family, but I came from a family where both my father and mother, although they did it in different ways, my father and my was like we knew we were number one. Like we never had to ask. But it wasn't like we were spoiled. It was just kind of like from a time standpoint. We literally grew up knowing we were rich in time. We also knew we weren't rich in money. Like we weren't poor by any means. When there was a middle class, we were middle class, right? And yet, what we were really abundant in was time. Like he taught and he coached and stuff. So I can't remember a night where I didn't say, "Hey, Dad, let's go play catch in the backyard," and he didn't do it. When I became an entrepreneur, and that was the thing that I got turned on by, right? In the beginning, I really struggled with this notion of like, well, how am I going to do that? Right. Work 24/7, 365, hustle grind, blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah. And be a dad. Like, so I literally remember early on making a decision. Like, I don't care how long it takes, but I'm going to be rich in time and money. Like I'm going to be rich in love and money. Like I'm going to figure that out. Cause at, at the early days, I saw people that had a lot of money, but they never saw their kids and their kids hated them. And then I saw my dad, who we didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't care because we had all the, love in the world. And I went, there's got to be a way to have both. Like, there's got to be. So for those listening to this, I think you're giving them maybe a comfort that it's not black or white. There's a way to do it in between. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the business trajectory. So I don't want to spend too much time on my social cloud unless you do, but I think it's been so well documented in the popular press and everything else. And anyone who Googles you or goes to staceyferreira.com can kind of really dive in on like how that happened and the different decisions you made and kind of some of the serendipitous things and also some of the ballsy stuff you and your brother did to make that work. But you started at 18, you guys sell it when you're 20, you're then showcased because you're these young entrepreneurs. You write a book called 2 Billion Under 20, which is how many people on the planet are under the age of 20 that are doing amazing things around the world. You've traveled all over. If you were to like sit here at this point in time and you were to look at some of the highs, like the things that you are surprised by, if you're really honest, you go, well, I didn't think that was going to happen, but that was really cool, or proud of. And I know it's hard for entrepreneurs to say, I'm proud of it because we're just never satisfied. And we just always, but just think about like some of the highs. List off a couple things that, that maybe aren't known that you just go, this has been really cool that I've been able to experience because I've been on this journey of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, a few things. I think first is there's always the high, being 18 years old and getting a few folks like Branson to be able to say, hey, I believe in you and what you're working on, and writing a check to back my first company, that was a high,
Sure.
right? That's something that clearly not everyone gets to experience every day. But beyond kind of that stuff, I think there are a few other things. One is just working with great people. And this is something that as I've grown in my career, I've learned is vitally important, and every single day it becomes more important to me, which is, just some of the people that I've had the great fortune of working with and learning from as friends and mentors throughout this process. Those people and those relationships are things that can never be replaced, regardless of, what happens and what company I'm working on. Those relationships transcend. So highs for me are getting to work with really smart, intelligent people and surrounding myself with people who are getting better themselves every day. So that's one. And then another like high that, and maybe we'll go into this, but also some of the lows, I think the biggest highs that I get are getting through those lows and being able to stand back up on the other side of that and then look back, 30, 60, 90 days after I've just done something that I thought was going to be impossible, and being like, holy crap, like, how did we do that? How did I pull that off? And it's those moments too. And any entrepreneur knows you have a million of those throughout your career. But it's those moments too, especially when things get so close to the wire, so close to what you perceive to be the end, and then you somehow turn it around. Those have been, when I look back, the things that I've been most proud of, is just that grit and sticking through it.
Yeah, that's perfect segue. It's funny because when you say that, I'm thinking about how much that relates to what we're affectionately calling this disease of entrepreneurship. The reason why we acquired a couple months ago, why we acquired Startup Drugs with a Z, but why we acquired that, and why this podcast is being launched is because the notion was, here's this community that kind of got started, an apparel brand, did really well. It was kind of a side hustle, yet there was this engagement level of real entrepreneurs in it, and also aspiring ones. But there was this, 20, 30,000, list of people that are building stuff, just like you're building stuff. And we thought, it's this notion that if starting up is your drug of choice, is the pun that we kind of have been playing with, then we're your community, we're your support group, right? Because the reason why we're addicted to this life, I believe, at least this is my bias based on my own experience, is because of the struggle. It's like no one wants it. You analogize it to sports. You can, like, no one who does anything miraculous goes, I want blisters on my hand, or I want to blow out my knee, or no one says that. And no entrepreneur goes, I want to, miss payroll, or I want to be bankrupt, or I want to have everyone lie to me, or I want my best friend to sue me, or no one sets that out ever as their target or their goal. But just like sports, or just like things, part of what makes this game so rewarding is the fact that everyone seems to at some point be trying, or everything at some point seems like it's trying to stop you. And that you can't control the things you can't control, but you can control what it does to you or what you let it do to you. And you can go create, like you can go create another business if that one didn't work, or you can go change the product, or you can go hire, and it's this weird piece of our DNA that gets off on that. Do you agree?
100%. And I was going to say, I think that's one of the things that marks, in some ways, what it means to be an entrepreneur. To some extent, like you said, we get a little bit of a high off of that. And for me personally, when I think about, what's spurring that, why do I, in some sense, rush back to do things like starting another company after you've just gone through kind of the pain of another one? And I think a lot of times for me, it comes down to A, I'm probably addicted to it. And then B, I'm addicted to the learning that comes with that, quite candidly. I feel like there's nowhere that I get as intellectually challenged and learn as much as I do other than in running my company.
Yeah, I think that's a big insight, actually. I don't want to skip over that one because, I'm, as you're saying that, I'm inherently, hopefully, like every listener to this right now, asking myself, why am I addicted to it? And I've asked myself that, for 20 years, right, at different points, because they aren't always great. As you get older and as more people, you start to reflect on the collateral damage in ways that you don't when you're, maybe earlier on. And it's not because you're wiser. I think it's just because there's more of it. and you realize that for every impact you make that's positive, which there's more of, otherwise we wouldn't, most people wouldn't be doing this. There's unintended consequences in every action we take and everything we build. And, as you become more mature and less full of yourself and less glamorizing of this whole thing, and you realize it's just who you are, and it's just a path that you are fortunate enough to be able to be on, that you start to just be more thoughtful about the unintended consequences, and you try and make certain things cleaned up, maybe that in the moment 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't for any number of reasons. Right. And so I asked myself that question too. And I think what you just said is probably one of the most accurate statements of why it is an addiction, is that this human nature of we're built to become more aware. We're built to become more of who we already are. We're built to unfold whatever it is that's inside of us dying to be unfolded. And we also are not going to be able to unfold all of it, meaning there's more potential in us than we're ever going to actually materialize while we're on this rock. That every time that you're reminded of that through some kind of give and get, some kind of fail and win, that it's just another nugget of why you can't stop, because it becomes like, I'm more of myself. I'm more aware. I'm more empathetic. I'm more whatever it was that you weren't before, right? The other side of it is you're stronger, just like the muscles in your body are stronger every time you push them in the gym. I do think that that's part of what it comes down to, is that it's just so hard to imagine being sedentary.
Completely agreed. Could not have said it better. Completely agreed.
I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like my hell, if there was a place like hell, which it's not a spiritual discussion. If there was a place like hell, my hell would be being told that I had to go sit behind, it doesn't even have to be a desk. It could be, I just have to go do the same thing every day. And maybe even if you uncapped my income, even if you said, listen, you can make whatever number you think is ridiculous to make in a year, you can have that number, but you have to go do the same thing every day. You cannot change it, cannot question it. You cannot think about it. And you have to take breaks every 3 hours for 15 minutes. I don't care what you paid me. I could not do that. That would be my living hell.
No, I was going to say similar. I was going to say, I think the thing is, you and I, we could probably do it. It's just a question of we wouldn't like it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I would do it. But it doesn't matter what you quantify it as. If you think of, early on, most entrepreneurs, when they're, early on in their career, and there's nothing wrong with it because it's a natural push-pull like everything else. They're doing it to get somewhere. They're doing it to get something that they're not, right? They want a certain amount of money, or they want a certain, when I exit my social cloud and I've got millions of dollars, then I'll feel and then you get there and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not, it doesn't mean it doesn't it's not good. It means it's great. It just means it's not enough. It's not the game. The game is not the outcome,
right?
Any more than climbing a certain mountain is enough for a mountain climber.
Exactly. I think that's spot on. And that's the big thing for me is the thing that I know about myself is I feel like I'm just really intellectually curious. And that doesn't mean that I'm, I don't even have a college degree. So that doesn't mean that I'm intellectual in the sense that I'm going to college and sitting in a classroom. It just means that, once I learn one thing, there's another question that pops up in my mind. And for whatever reason, I have to go and figure that out. And luckily, I've been fortunate enough to be on a path where that manifests itself through building companies, which can be economically viable. But really, it's just this intellectual curiosity around the way that the world is going to look in the future.
So let's talk about college in a second, but I want to try and weave it into, let's talk about a time where you had your wind kicked out. Pick one where it really sucked. You really were scared. You really were not your normal self. You couldn't right out of the gate immediately intellectualize how you were going to solve it. That thing where you go, holy shit, that might be it.
Yeah.
Tell me about one of those. And then, talk about, what it was, how it felt, and then certainly, move through how you got there. And then I want to come back to this notion of college and not college for a second, but I want to start with one of these lows. So pick one and just tell us about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I can, talk a little bit about in the early days of Forge, the company that I'm working on now. Luckily I'm about 4 years into this business now, not quite 3.5, But there was a point about maybe 6 months to 8 months into this business where, I had started it. I had assembled a good team of folks that I had worked with on the previous business. We had kind of iterated on our product 3 different times. So I had this idea that I wanted people to be able to open up an app on their phone, see a job that was available, like a 4-hour shift available at Gap. They would be able to just go onto their phone, book that shift, go into Gap, work that 4-hour shift, and then get paid. A way for people to just make some extra income in cash. And so that was the initial thesis that I had for Forge. Assembled a team, raised some capital, built out the first version of the product, launched it with a few of our first clients, and very quickly on realized that for a variety of reasons, people didn't really like that version of the product, meaning businesses were like, hey, in theory, this is great. In theory, it's the Uber of work. But the reality is, if I get people who don't know any of our brand standards, they've never been trained on our product, all that, then my productivity goes down. We're not able to upsell as much within the store. So I really need people that are my own employees. I don't just want any Joe Schmo off the street. So went back to the drawing board with the team once more and said, okay, why don't we build a software that allows these businesses to, hire their own pool of talent, build out a labor pool of people who are going to work for them. They can hire them, train them officially, and then those people can come plug in shifts. And we built out software that allowed them to do that, plus like time and attendance software. So all of the scheduling software and time and attendance and all that sort of stuff, and launched that with our first 7 clients that we were able to get. And that first version of the product with the new time and attendance and scheduling and all of that, when we launched it, the time and attendance portion of it just was not working. We were, for whatever reason, the technology was recording the wrong hours and this whole thing. And so I then had to do a very hard thing, which was go back to those 7 clients and say, hey, sorry for, kind of messing up your business processes and not having the technology, all the kinks worked out. But respectfully, I want to keep your businesses intact. So we're going to pull away, rework on the technology, and come back to you when it's ready. So that was really hard to do in and of itself. But when you kind of zoom out and look at the larger picture, every company goes through these iteration points where, you've got a hypothesis, you've got to build something, go out and test it. We'd gone through that cycle twice. And we were also running out of cash at the time. And people on the team were wondering, like, hey, why are both of these things not working? And it was just, part of that iterative process. But the biggest issue was that cash was really running out. And so that was also a big point of concern for, everyone in the business, including myself, which was, okay, we got to be able to make payroll for all these people or make some cuts.
You were also in that proverbial no woman's land, right? Where in order to get more cash, you need working customers, you need product market fit, and you need proof of concept. And yet
Exactly.
You didn't have that. But in order to get to that, you needed cash to buy you the time and the talent to get to that. And it's the no man's land that almost every business at some point faces. And, there's really, where do you go, right?
Yep. And so that was exactly what I was facing, which was I knew that I needed to raise more capital. I knew that we didn't have the proof points, the customers, the traction that we needed to be able to really do that. And so I felt for a few weeks, I remember it just being really tough of me being like, what am I going to do to get us out of this? I can't go to new investors. They're not going to, we don't have anything to really go to them with. And so, what I did was I kind of went back to the drawing board and I said, if I have 3 more hypotheses around how this could go, what are those? And how would I go about running those experiments? And so I kind of documented my thoughts there. And for each of those experiments, kind of devise what kind of team would I need to be agile enough to be able to, run those experiments and learn from them and hopefully come out the other end with something successful that clients like. And so I kind of put that all together and went back to my investors and I said, hey, this is going to be really tough. We're going to have to make some team changes. I'm also going to need some more capital, but here are my 3 thoughts of places that we can take this. And I'm fairly confident on number 1, fairly meaning like 95% based off of everything that we've learned that this is going to work. But if not, here's 2 and 3. There's something in this space. I know there is based off of all the customer conversations that we've had, but I need time to just go and experiment and figure out what exactly that is. And went to my investors with that plan, with the capital that I thought was going to be required. And luckily, kind of a testament to those early investors, pretty much all of them stepped back up to the plate and put in more capital to keep us alive. And now, luckily, we've been running this thing for 3 years after that point, and we've got a lot of super happy customers, and we're across the United States and growing at a rapid rate. But there was that period of time where I just didn't know if we were going to get out of that.
What did you think about when you thought about what if they don't fund? What was the feeling? Or have you ever been in a position where you didn't get the money on something between
Yeah.
your first exit and like what did you do about it?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'll be honest, that funding did not come easy. I had a ton of conversations with folks, and it was something that's kind of trickled in over time, even. So it was something where it was, I had a few people who 100% believed, and they were like, "Yep, here we'll write a check." And then others who were like, "Show me a few more milestones before we write the next check." So it wasn't easy by any means.
So you're continuing to solve cash and you were still trying to build the business and build the technology and, meaning like you had 3 jobs at that point because when you get it trickled in, it gives you enough air to breathe, but not enough air to like run.
Exactly.
And but you have to run. And so now not only are you trying to figure out how to do that yourself, but you're also trying to keep everybody else running.
Yeah.
And yet, if you don't do it, now you just made good money after bad for the people that did believe and you didn't get there. And if you don't do it, you don't get the next money, which means you don't get there, but you don't know because you're kind of in this limbo period of you've got enough to take another step and punch another day, but you don't know yet. You don't have any certainty and you don't know when you're going to get that certainty.
Yep. And for any entrepreneur who's been there, as I'm sure you know too, Chris, like that's a scary place to be, right?
All too well.
And you've got a lot of sleepless nights because exactly to your point, if it becomes a situation where people put in good money that becomes bad because you're constantly just living to breathe every single day, that's a really tough spot. And so you've got to figure out a way that you can propel yourself and not worry too much about the fact that you've got to go and find new checks every so often to keep things afloat. Because you've got to just really hit those milestones to make sure that you're able to get that cash in. And then finally, you'll get a big enough check in that, okay, you can breathe a little bit more and really focus longer term.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny you said sleepless nights. I think, sometimes it manifests or, it has for me in too good of sleepless nights because depending on where you are, sometimes you can't sleep because all you're thinking about is like in your head, all the auto drafts, all the payrolls, all those things that you need to, those obligations you need to keep the wind, they're registering in your head in real time and you can't fall asleep, right? Or you wake up and then you're like, oh, like I can wait. I just need some sleep. I'm exhausted. And then there's other days or there's other, maybe even that same night where it manifests where you don't want to get out of bed. Like, you literally are like sleeping in and you're like, I really can't afford to sleep in, but I just I don't want to call it depression because it's never showed up for me as depression. I know that that's a real thing that has shown up for a lot of entrepreneurs and it, is continuing and needs to be talked about more. But it's interesting how it just physiologically, it impacts you in different ways. And it's kind of when something's wrong, like, and you've sometimes you just got to gut through it. Like literally you just have to play hurt. Like there is no answer. You just have to play through it.
Yeah. I was going to say, and there are a lot of times like that. I mean, I've been obviously doing this stuff for a long time, but and not on 2 hands, but I can think back to a lot of times where exactly as you said, you're like, man, I really don't want to get out of bed today. But at the same time, you've got a million things that you got to do. And the fact is, if you don't do it, it's not getting done.
Right.
So you've got to get yourself, somehow motivate yourself to get out of bed and just power through, even if in your heart of hearts, you're like, I know my productivity is going to be low today or whatever it is, but hey, 50% is still better than 0. So you still got to get up and go do it.
What did you learn in this, example as it related to Forge? What did you learn as a leader, as an executive, as an entrepreneur that nuanced your game, that took your, I hate to call it like your responsibility quotient, but because that's not a thing and I'm just making that up. But like what I'm trying to ask at is, did you refine an aspect of your game or your swing because of the pain of that? It may not change the way that you got the process in the next time? Meaning, like, you may not change the fundamental process of iteration and all that, but you may change your approach to capitalization or your approach to hiring, your approach to selling to a customer. Like, did anything in there become tightened and sharpened and like razors edged from that lesson? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of things that came out of that. One is that whole experience taught me the importance of capital partners. So if any entrepreneur is ever thinking about raising any amount of financing for their company, be it, $10,000 or $10 million, the importance of who you partner with for capital makes the difference. Because in my case, those were the only people at the time that I could honestly go back to and ask for more help and ask for more capital. And if those people had been anyone else, honestly, they might not have been there to have my back. And so having good capital partners is number one for me. And, when I go through future financing rounds, people have always asked, what are you looking for in a partner? And I'm like, a lot of people want these checkbox items. And for me, it's just, I want to sit down across from the table with those people that I think about taking money from. And I want to know in my heart of heart and in my gut that those are good people that I want to build a business with. So I think that's number one, is like really get to know your investors. It's not a one-way street, meaning a lot of times entrepreneurs feel like they're in the begging seat. So they need money, so they'll take it from anyone. But taking the wrong money, only delays the pain if you're taking money from the wrong people. So that's number one. Number two is, make sure that you've got the right people on your team from the get-go. And by right people, I mean, these are people that don't have to have some Ivy League degree or whatever it is. It's the people that are going to get in the weeds. If you need them to be in Dallas tomorrow morning, they're going to get on a plane tonight and make that happen for you. Like, the people that will go at all lengths to make stuff happen and who are not scared by things changing. Because the reality is things in startups change every 24 hours, right? And there's so much happening that you just need people who are going to be agile enough with that and communicative enough around those things that you're going to jive well in those early days.
Yeah, and I would analogize that piece too to, like, changing doesn't mean, fundamentally changing every 24 hours. It means the ability to call audibles because the environment that you're playing on shifted.
Right.
And there's a higher likelihood for it doesn't, it's this weird thing that, like, I know what it is. And I know, the people that are close to you in your business know what that means for you and them, but it's so hard to articulate sometimes to people. Like, it's when people say, oh my God, it's just changing, I can't keep up with you. It's like, if people really get it, they realize that what's not changing is the desired outcome. What's not changing is the goal. What's not changing, like, fundamentally, you're probably not wrong on the core premise, right? In most cases, that certainly doesn't change every 24 hours. Otherwise, you don't have a business. But
right.
Your ability to say, look, we're, like in football, we're trying to score a touchdown and we're trying to score more of those than the other person so that we can win the game. And here's the time horizon we have to do that. That's the goal. So it really is almost the ability to just go, whatever it takes. And we know that we're going to get, the metaphorical 4 downs, right? Or 3 downs to get another one. And it's like, you don't see it as change, but change is what it is, but you don't see it as fundamental change. You see it as just necessary, right? It's like the crystal clear goal has not changed. How we get there is not relevant, right? Meaning, like, inside of our core values and inside of that, there's certain boundaries, but outside of that, anything's for grabs, right? Like, we're not going to do these certain things, but outside of that, anything's on the table. And you better be up for that game if you work for Stacey Ferreira.
Exactly. Completely agreed.
So let's talk quickly about college, and let's talk about how we can help you, because this has been really insightful for the entrepreneurs listening to this. And I think really cool because on this show, we're featuring a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing non-venture capital backed paths. Most people shouldn't raise money. We or institutional money. If they're just, depending on what their goals are. But in your case, you're someone who's done that multiple times and you have a reason for doing that. You're in technology. And so I think, it's a really relevant case study for people that are following a path similar to yours, or where they have to think about the dynamics you have to face in your business as it relates to scale and competition and capital partners. when you said you didn't go to college, a lot is being said now about the value of college, and everything seems binary, which I hate because there is no such thing. I mean, in code, there's binary, and in winning and losing, there's binary. But as it relates to this journey of life and self-awareness, that's less binary than people want to make it. And everyone's looking for the shortcut, right? Just human nature. So it's kind of like for the last decade, we've heard, don't like everybody's kid should be an entrepreneur. Now, I'm all for entrepreneurial training. It's why we do these podcasts, why we do all this stuff. Because I think the thinking and the skill set of being entrepreneurial in some way is valuable to everybody. I also think that you're rare, and the people that are interviewed on this show are part of a rare breed of humanity that is willing to go through the pain, just like there's people that are willing to do other things that are painful, like be Green Berets or whatever. So what is your thoughts on college? Like, do you have any regrets? Do you ever feel pressure to go back now? Did that ever happen? And how did, and what would you do with your own kids if you have, at some point, like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so college, I did 2 years of college, and I kind of did it split. So I did my freshman year, and then I dropped out for 3 years, and then I did my sophomore year, and then I dropped out for another 3 years. So, my college trajectory has been up and down all over the place. But for the most part, I would say no regrets. If I look back and I say there's one thing that I look around at my peers and I feel like maybe a little bit they have more than me is, deep relationships from college. When I think about who my best friends are, I tend to think about my friends from high school simply because I didn't spend that time in college. But that's not to say, I've got other entrepreneurial friends who started their own businesses at a young age, and those kids are ones that I kind of think of as my college crew. But I was never a part of a frat or a sorority or anything like that some of my other friends are. And I feel like they made really deep connections from that I made in a different way. So no regrets, but there's definitely differences that you see if you decide not to take that path.
Interesting. I say that's interesting because I didn't become an entrepreneur until well after college. And it's interesting that you bring that up because I hadn't thought about that. But, being almost 44 and kind of maybe another decade or so ahead of you on your path, I think about who my best friends are and I don't have a ton, but most of them are entrepreneurs, and I didn't design it that way. I have meaningful pockets of my life where, like my college crew, as you said, I played college football. So naturally I had this brotherhood of young men that, I bled with, and there were 6 of them that we were inseparable, all of which have gone on and, had families and whatever. And a handful of which I still see from time to time. There's no loss of love for what they were, but I'm not like in relationship with them the way that like we romanticize friendship in movies and stuff. Now, that being said, there's safe landing places for me if I ever needed to say, I just need someone who knows who I am to talk to and be a piece of shit for a minute because I don't have my shit together. I could call any one of them, but it's not like we do that. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So it's interesting that brings up because I think that, I guess how I would look at it is that relationships come from common interest. I mean, that's the premise that we build this community on is all relationships that continue to evolve and move forward together in life seem to be because people are on a common trajectory.
Yep.
College for some people is that trajectory, but it also becomes that landing zone that they always harken back to and never move forward.
Yeah.
So it's their comfort zone. And so for people like you, for people like me, for people that are in this community that always are stretching their comfort zone, it's hard to have relationships, period.
Yeah.
That are deep, unless they're with people that are doing that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's one thing, I have some friends that I look around and it's not jealousy per se, but I'm like, man, if I, could just kind of hang out and chill out with friends like I see you doing. But I think I'm just wired differently, probably like you, where I'm always constantly looking for more growth and kind of gravitate towards people that are always trying to learn or grow and have conversations around those things.
Yeah, check in with those people when they're 40. It won't be as fun as it sounds and like it is right now if it doesn't evolve. And I say that without any judgment. I say that just from like, watching what happens as we age. Time becomes shorter regardless of if you're an entrepreneur or not. Back to your comment about your father and your relationship and scheduling stuff. It's like just time just moves fast, and people have kids and they have families and they have jobs and they have obligations and they have parents who get sick and old and need to be taken care of, and they have teenagers who need attention. And the bottom line is all of us, no matter where we create that community, have less time with it as we get older. And, the one thing that entrepreneurs have, I think, is they have a deep access to, through their curiosity or through all these things that seem to be maybe taking us away from that in the early years and in our 20s and 30s, that seem to be like this thing that, we're always having to justify, that it's actually the thing that everyone else is missing later.
Yeah, could be very true.
And the problem is if you don't do it now, which is, I'm not evangelizing entrepreneurship. I'm saying just grow. I'm evangelizing growth, personal growth. That's what I'm evangelizing. How you get there is independent. You've chosen entrepreneurship or it chose you. Same with me. But growth is the key. It's not about how you grow. If college is a way to grow, great, but it has to be a stepping stone for more growth, in my opinion, or it's worthless.
Yep. And that's kind of my thought on college too, which is it's got to be a stepping stone to growth. If you don't know what else to do with your time, college is a great place to go. However, if there are other ways that you can personally grow and learn, then college is a really expensive way to do that.
Very expensive.
Depending on where you're going to school. So that's why I always challenge people, look at what are all the things that you want to learn? What are all the ways that you think about your own growth and how you can grow personally? And college is just one of those avenues. Going and trying to get an internship or a job or whatever it is right out of high school is another feasible way to go. Or starting a company is another feasible way to go. But explore really all your options.
I like what you said. I like what you said earlier too about maybe the question is, what am I curious about? And then, when you're that age, that's the perfect time to be curious.
Exactly.
Right? Because your responsibilities, your overhead, they're as low as they're ever going to be. And yet you have a responsibility for yourself, not for anybody else, to figure out what you're going to do with your life, because you get to that point where it is now on you and you can break free from the things you don't want to continue that maybe were, forced on you and your upbringing, whether they were meant in love or not. You get to choose, but part of choosing is understanding what your options are. And so what am I curious about is a great question. All right, cool. Let's wrap it up with how we can increase the dosage for Join Forge and Stacey. What is it, if you were going to make an ask to the community of the most generous entrepreneurs on the planet, which is startup drugs globally, what is the ask now that you've served all of us with your wisdom?
Yeah, the ask is, we are looking to hire smart, intelligent folks. So be it in sales, marketing, engineering, operations. If anyone who's listening to this has a network or folks that you think would be good to come and join our mission of changing the future of work at Forge, send them our way.
Yeah, and you guys are doing some amazing, really interesting stuff. As I give my own, spiel for you as I understand it. I mean, essentially, you guys imagine a platform where retailers and people that have hourly jobs that are tough to fill, and even if they're able to fill them, maybe they can't provide employees with enough hours to meet their needs, and they don't want to lose good employees, and they have trouble retaining them or finding them. And then on the employee side of that equation, you want to pick up more shifts. Maybe you want to travel and you work for a brand that has locations in other places, but you can't leave because the Starbucks on your corner, you can't go get a job at the Starbucks. Like, you've solved that. You've now allowed people to basically talent share, and you've got major brands buying in and shopping centers buying in, and it's got some traction. And so really worth looking at. Take a look at joinforge.com. I'm assuming if they have any initial inquiries about talent or jobs, they can find that on the site, or they can email you, Stacey with an EY at joinforge.com. Is that accurate?
That's perfect. That'd be great.
Well, we're going to all continue watching your success. If you haven't read her book, 2 Billion Under 20, and you're the parent of someone who's under 20, read it. If you're under 20, read it. Came out a couple years ago and is a great book on just kind of the opportunity of what's next and what we can do to shape the future in a more positive way, and who's going to be leading that charge. And if you don't follow her on all the things that you follow people on, do that. And we really appreciate you here at Increase the Dosage. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you, Stacey, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Increase the Dosage. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned, as well as a few quotes for sharing on social media, head on over to startupdrugs.com/podcast. And that's drugs with a Z. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at startupdrugs, and have a fantastic day.